Hello and welcome, I'm Kerch and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Ukraine is introducing a state of martial law on almost half of its territory. This will go in force on November 28th for 30 days. To clarify some of the points of martial law, we welcome to the studio Mykola Kapitonenko, Director of the Center for International Studies NGO. Hello and thank you for joining us today. So, first of all, let's explain the audience why was it important for Ukraine to impose such measures?
Well, this seems to be a logical step in response to the rise of instability and the danger of escalation due to the crisis in the Kerch Strait. But on the other hand, there are certainly internal political considerations which has contributed into introduction of martial law. And
what do you mean
I think that Ukrainian society and experts are split in estimating what actually caused the introduction of the martial law, since we have already had the 4 years of a warfare against Russia. We have huge catastrophes, including military catastrophes in the east of Ukraine.
How do you think, why wasn't martial law introduced back in 2014?
I think that, first of all, there have been internal considerations again, because it was necessary to hold elections, which is impossible under martial law.
Yes.
And on the second...
well, this is the case now too.
Yeah, right. On the second hand, but now it is probably in the interests of some political press to postpone elections, vice versa. And on the other hand, there was a pressure from our Western partners, who were really interested back in 2014 in raising legitimacy of Ukrainian government. And because of that...
So it had to be changed.
Yes, certainly. Elections had to be held at any cost, practically. And that's why it hasn't been introduced then. When it is introduced today, still there is an open question, what is the final goal? What is the aim of introducing it? Because it doesn't seem like we are going to mobilize or to launch an assault in the occupied territories. We are not even going probably to break diplomatic relations with Russia.
Yes, we're not. Yeah, this was already stated.
The questions are still here.
But how would you evaluate? I just want to know your opinion. How do you think? How strong is this measure as a way to retaliate on Russian aggression in the Azov Sea, and how effective can it be in this way?
I personally believe that it is not the best response. That the only actually open option for us is to go legally, to seal the cases in courts and to try to persuade international juridical bodies in Russia's breaking in international norms.
But you see that courts are lasting for years, and Russia is not really adhering to any sentence of the court.
But that's the only way to go, because otherwise we have a military option, which is actually not an option for us, because the balance of power
with the force. But don't you think that this was the way to draw a lot of attention, a lot of international attention to this Ukrainian situation? Because now we're in the headlines everywhere, worldwide.
I think we are mostly exaggerating the international reaction to what we are having. I mean, we are exaggerating the attention which is being paid to the Ukrainian events, not only for the recent events, but for the whole range of things which are happening here in the last 4 years.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that we think that international community is closely watching Ukraine, but it is not so closely watching it as we would like it to do.
Yes, of course. So that is why, with this measure, we could draw more attention.
I mean, we can draw attention, but we will not get the position of Western powers in the way we like. They will not support us. They will not send troops. They will not provide more money. They will not even. They probably will not impose new sanctions against Russia.
Do you think so?
I think so. Then the Western focus here is to try to avoid any risk of further escalation, just as it has been for the previous 4 years.
But it's already escalating, and there are statements that Russia can continue this invasion in Ukraine. Plus, I would like to ask then, why would U.S. Security Council would hold an emergency meeting? Why would OSCE hold an emergency meeting if they are not really interested in this Ukrainian situation, as you say?
The United Nations Security Council has been gathered on the call from both Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, but Ukraine was first, and then Ukrainian agenda was adopted.
That's the result of the balance of opinions within the Security Council. but that does not mean that it will result in effective decisions or effective measures taken by the Council, since Russia holds the veto power within the as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. There will be no effective decisions from this body, and both the European Union and NATO have called to both parties to try to somehow to avoid further escalation. So that means that they place some part of responsibility upon Ukraine. We may criticize it, and we do.
As far as I know, NATO strongly condemned Russia's actions and expressed full support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and also the United States.
At the same time, they called upon both parties to refrain from further actions which could lead to escalation. That's the way the Western powers treat all situations like this, because there are several places in the world where different countries have disputes over territories and have different views on how to which countries these territories belong. And this eventually may lead to certain crises. And there is an international practice that you try to avoid any points of possible escalation. And that's I think, would be the position of the Western powers.
Does martial law escalate the conflict? Does this imposition of the martial law escalate the conflict?
I don't think that it is escalating the conflict. It is just sending signals to both Ukrainian society on the eve of elections and to our international partners. But I don't think that introducing martial law is sending positive signals to international community, because...
but it's also not escalating the situation.
It is not escalating the situation. It's more like a warning, but at the same time it sends signals to Western capitals that Ukraine is, starting from now, from tomorrow, is shifting to a very specific mode of behavior. And that would probably result in some risks for Ukraine as well.
Well, for sure, it will result in economical losses for Ukraine, and it might result very much on this macroeconomical level. But speaking of politics, it's still very controversial that martial law would be a very wrong decision for this. But could you please explain how will this law function? How will this state of martial law work in Ukraine? What's changing?
I personally think that nothing will fundamentally change, because, again, we are introducing the law not in order to take immediate measures, specifically not to take immediate military measures. We are taking it just as an opportunity to give the president a shorter time to react if a certain aggression is taking place on land, as far as I understand his speech.
To militarize some certain areas, as far as I understand. Yeah.
The law has been introduced partially. I mean that it is a compromise, a result of political compromise, and it touches upon 10 regions, and it will last for 30 days. And as such, it will have a very limited effect on increasing Ukraine's military capability. And I don't think that it will somehow dramatically impact the dynamics of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia.
So you don't like this scenario of imposing the martial law, but what other options would you outline that Ukraine could agree to?
First of all, we should again get back to the legal frame and consider or reconsider the future of the bilateral treaty we have with Russia on utilizing the sea of on cooperation on utilizing the Sea of Azov and the Kerch Strait.
As a recognition of the Azov Sea as international waters, you mean, this treaty?
Which recognize the Azov Sea as the internal waters of Ukraine and Russia. And this treaty has been violated by what Russia is doing. And we have to take legal steps which would address these violations and probably consider the future of whether Ukraine should further adhere to the treaty.
But do you believe this will be more effective?
I think it will be more effective because, again, we don't have a military option. No matter whether we introduce martial law or not, we are not capable of fighting a war against Russia. We just can increase our military capabilities in order to contain Russia a bit.
But don't you think that Putin goes further if we don't retaliate anyhow?
I don't think
any strong message.
Frankly speaking, I don't think that Putin will go any further. I don't believe in the plans of capturing Berdyansk or Mariupol or southern eastern Ukraine. I think that what Putin wants is to hold the position in the Crimea, to de facto deny an open access of Ukrainian ships into the Azov Sea from the Black Sea, and probably to resolve somehow by applying this pressure the issue of Donbas. I don't believe that there are realistic plans of conquering more territories of Ukraine, because it would bring more problems to Russia than advantages. That's why I think that Ukrainian reaction should be asymmetric in a way, not so open, not so direct, since we are running the risks of escalation. We will be the side which will be in a more risky position. That's why we have to avoid situations like the one which happened the day before yesterday.
Does this mean that you also do not believe the report from the Ukrainian intelligence about this growing military presence near the Russian border, that the President of Ukraine and the representative of Ukraine to the United Nations were mentioning about this possible escalation and Russian invasion in Ukraine?
I do believe every report which is saying that Russian troops are concentrated along the border, but
you don't believe that they are going to invade?
I don't think that they will go to invade. I think this is a way to effectively threat with invasion.
Well, I got this. I got your opinion about this. Let's speak about the fate of these 24 sailors that are being held captive in occupied Kerch. How do you think? What's going to happen with them? Can we release them?
I don't see any way the procedure for releasing them would be different from the typical one we have
with the political prisoners.
With the political prisoners in Russia.
But these ones are recognized by Ukrainian government as prisoners of war. Does it change anything or not really?
It probably changes something within the Ukrainian context, but for this specific situation, it is more important what the Kremlin considers them to be and how it defines their status. And I think that depending on further combinations, political combinations on the eve of the elections, the issue of prisoners, any prisoners, including those 23 or 24 different estimations, I don't know the exact number, by the way.
Yes, there is different data, 23 or 24.
Their fate will depend on the goodwill of Putin, just as the fate of other prisoners in Russia depend on.
Well, and the very last question to ask, speaking of this state of martial law, what freedoms and rights of Ukrainians can be restricted in these 10 regions that are outlined for this new type of governance?
Again, they must have been specified in the decree of the president, which has been introducing the law.
Yes, they are.
And the articles of the Constitution enlisted there include a number of freedoms, including the freedom of speech, freedom of gathering, freedom for education, I mean the right to have an education. Your property, your assets can be used by the state in order to perceive any goals connected to this military status. But on the other hand, we didn't see the final version of the law yet. The one which has been published today, as far as I understand, is an old version introduced by the president, which contained the 60 days period and the whole territory of Ukraine. So we still have to wait and see what's the final wording in the document.
But how beneficial can the state be with this kind of measures? How efficient can we become in this building up of this defense strategy?
I don't actually see how it can be effectively implied, because de facto this would result in 10 regions living approximately under the rules under which the territories in Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast controlled by Ukraine are living under the present law. So this status will just be spread into 8 other regions, and I don't see how it can be effectively used, because we have a standoff in the east of Ukraine, and we will just as a result have a more effective defense along the perimeter of Ukrainian borders. But I don't see any possibility of enhancing political, diplomatic, or any other agenda, or any other significant changes in the dynamics of the country.
Well, yeah, but martial law was about this stronger military presence, not about diplomacy, defense. For sure.
Yeah.
But, well, we run out of time, but I thank you for being a guest today in our studio, and thank you for this really interesting comments. That was Mykola Kapitonenko, Director of the Center for International Studies NGO. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Kerch. Goodbye.